The words landed softly, but they shattered something inside me that had taken 32 years to build. My mother stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding a glass of wine, wearing the same smile she had used since childhood whenever she wanted to make me feel small. Around her sat my father, my younger sister, my aunt, and 2 cousins. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody looked uncomfortable. That was when I understood the worst part. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't a sudden decision. They had discussed my absence, agreed upon it, and apparently felt entitled to announce it like they were canceling a dinner reservation. My mother tilted her head and said with a smirk, "We all agreed, you're not welcome at the wedding." I looked at every face around that table, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell her she had gone too far. No one did. So I slowly placed my phone on the counter, took a breath, and answered with the only words I could trust myself to say. "Good to know." I picked up my coat and walked out without crying. They probably thought I was defeated. They had no idea that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away because I had lost. I was walking away because I had finally understood my worth. If you've ever been made to feel like an outsider by the very people who were supposed to make you feel at home, stay with me. And if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that family should be built on love rather than blood, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps these stories reach people who may be silently going through something similar. For most of my childhood, I had been the quiet one in our family. My sister, Claire, was beautiful, outgoing, confident, and effortlessly charming. When relatives visited, everyone gathered around her. When she won a school award, my mother bought flowers. When she performed in a dance recital, my father took half a day off work. When I brought home perfect grades, my mother would glance at the paper and tell me not to become arrogant. I learned early that praise was something Claire received naturally, while I had to earn every scrap of approval. I didn't hate my sister for it. That was the strange part. I loved her. I protected her. I covered for her when she broke things, helped her with homework, and once spent nearly an entire summer working part-time so I could help her pay for a college program she desperately wanted. I thought one day she would remember that. I thought one day my parents would notice. Instead, I became the reliable daughter. The daughter who didn't cause trouble. The daughter who showed up when someone needed help. The daughter who remembered birthdays, paid attention to medical appointments, brought groceries, and stayed late after family gatherings to clean the kitchen. Somehow, being dependable became another reason for people to take me for granted. When I was 24, my father lost his job after the company he had worked for downsized. My parents were frightened, and I stepped in. I wasn't wealthy. I had a modest apartment, student loans, and a demanding job at an insurance company. Still, I transferred money into my parents' account every month. I never told them exactly how much because I didn't want them to feel embarrassed. I skipped vacations. I drove an old car long after it should have been replaced. I learned how to make a week's worth of meals from whatever was on sale at the grocery store. Every sacrifice felt worth it because I believed family meant helping each other when life became difficult. Then came the year everything changed. I received a promotion at work. My salary increased significantly, and for the first time, I could breathe financially. I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood with a little garden in front. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I painted the walls myself. I planted flowers along the walkway. I put a tiny wooden bench beneath the window because I imagined someday sitting there with my own children. My mother visited once. She walked through the house, looked around, and smiled politely before saying that Claire's apartment had much better taste. I laughed it off. A few months later, Claire announced her engagement to Daniel, a successful attorney whose family owned several businesses. Suddenly, everything changed. My parents spoke about Claire constantly. There were discussions about venues, dresses, flowers, photographers, invitations, menus, seating arrangements, and honeymoon destinations. I was happy for my sister. I genuinely was. I even volunteered to help. I offered to organize the guest list. I offered to help with invitations. I offered to contribute money. My mother rejected the money but happily accepted my help. For nearly 6 months, I became invisible labor behind a beautiful wedding. I spent evenings comparing vendors. I drove across town to inspect decorations. I helped Claire choose invitation designs. I created spreadsheets. I answered messages when she was overwhelmed. When she cried because the florist canceled 2 weeks before the ceremony, I spent an entire Saturday calling alternatives until I found one willing to step in. Nobody thanked me much. but I didn't mind. I thought this was what sisters did. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a message from Claire asking me to come to our parents' house. I arrived expecting another planning discussion. Instead, I found everyone sitting around the kitchen table. My mother poured herself a drink. My father stared at his hands. Claire wouldn't look at me. My aunt was there too, along with 2 cousins. The room felt wrong. My mother smiled. Then came those words. "We all agreed, you're not welcome at the wedding." For several seconds, I couldn't process them. I actually thought she was joking. I looked at Claire. She finally raised her eyes. There was guilt in them, but not enough to stop what was happening. My mother explained that Daniel's family considered the wedding an important social event, and they didn't want complications. Apparently, my life didn't fit the image they wanted to present. I wasn't married. I wasn't part of their social circle. I had become too independent. Someone had apparently made comments about the fact that I didn't dress like the women attending the wedding. Another person had apparently suggested that I might make the family uncomfortable because I asked too many practical questions about money. The reasons kept changing, but the message stayed the same. They didn't want me there. I suddenly remembered every time I had been useful to them. The money. The errands. The phone calls. The late nights. The emergency florist. The spreadsheets. The countless little things nobody noticed because I had done them without asking for recognition. And now that the wedding photographs were about to be taken, I was no longer useful. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. "Good to know." My mother blinked. Perhaps she had expected tears. Perhaps she wanted an argument. Instead, I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my living room with the lights off. Rain tapped against the windows. I stared at the wedding invitation lying on my coffee table. My name wasn't printed anywhere on it. I had helped create that invitation. I had checked the spelling. I had corrected the address. I had even paid the final postage bill when Claire's card stopped working. I picked it up and held it for a long time. Then I threw it into the trash. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I had been excluded from a wedding. Because I realized I had spent years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I didn't deserve one. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. My phone contained 17 messages. Most were from relatives. Some told me not to make this about myself. Others said I needed to understand that Claire's wedding was supposed to be her special day. One message from my mother simply said, "I hope you can behave maturely about this." I stared at the screen. Then I turned the phone off. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to fix anything. I went to work. I focused on my projects. I ate lunch at my desk. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I began feeling lighter. It wasn't happiness yet. It was relief. A few days later, I received an email from my company's regional director. She wanted to meet with me privately. I assumed I was in trouble. Instead, she offered me an opportunity to lead a new department in another city. It was the kind of promotion people waited years to receive. The salary was excellent. The position came with a relocation package. And there was one catch. I would have to move within 6 weeks. 6 weeks earlier, I would have rejected it because Claire's wedding was approaching. Now I stared at the offer and smiled. I accepted. I didn't tell my family. For the next month, I quietly packed my belongings. I sold furniture I didn't need. I donated clothes. I found a small apartment near my new office. I told only a few close friends. One evening, while packing boxes, I found an old photograph of my family. Claire was 8. I was 12. My father had his arm around both of us. My mother stood beside him. We were all smiling. I sat on the floor and studied that picture for a long time. I realized something painful. I couldn't change the family I had been born into. But I could decide what kind of family I would create from that point forward. The wedding happened on a Saturday. I wasn't there. I didn't watch photographs online. I didn't ask anyone how it went. I spent that afternoon in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, eating takeout from a restaurant downstairs. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my family to invite me into a room. I was building my own room. 2 weeks later, I received a call from my father. I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, his voice sounded different. Tired. He told me the wedding had been beautiful. Then he went silent. I waited. Finally, he admitted that something had happened. During the reception, someone from Daniel's family had asked why I wasn't there. Claire had apparently tried to explain. Then one of my cousins, who had been drinking, said something careless. She told everyone that I had done most of the planning. She mentioned that I had helped pay for several expenses. She talked about how I had spent months making the wedding possible. The room went quiet. Then Daniel asked Claire why the person who had done so much for the wedding wasn't invited. My father said nobody knew what to say. I listened quietly. My father apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase 30 years. But it was the first time he had ever said the words, "We were wrong." I thanked him. Then I told him I needed time. 3 months passed. I became successful in my new position. My new colleagues respected me. My apartment slowly became a home. I joined a community garden. I started taking weekend pottery classes. I began having dinner with coworkers and neighbors. For years I had believed that being alone meant being unwanted. I discovered that sometimes being alone simply meant having enough space to hear yourself think. Then, one winter evening, someone knocked on my door. It was Claire. She stood there holding a small paper bag. She looked nervous. I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she had changed physically. Because the confidence was gone. She looked like someone who had finally been forced to confront something she had avoided for years. I led her inside. She handed me the bag. Inside was a photograph. It was from the wedding. Claire and Daniel stood beneath the flowers. Everyone was smiling. But Claire had written something on the back. She told me she had looked at that photograph hundreds of times and always noticed the same empty space. The place where I should have been. She apologized. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. She said she had been jealous of me. Not because I had more money. Not because I had a better job. Because I had something she didn't. The ability to survive without everyone's approval. She said she had spent her entire life trying to become the person our parents wanted her to be. And when she saw me becoming independent, she was afraid that if I stopped needing the family, I might stop loving them too. So she joined them in pushing me away. That confession hurt more than my mother's words. But it also explains something. People sometimes hurt you not because you are weak, but because your strength reminds them of what they haven't found in themselves. I didn't immediately forgive Claire. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a road. And I wasn't willing to sprint down it simply because someone had finally noticed my pain. But I told her she could stay for dinner. We talked for hours. For the first time in our adult lives, we spoke honestly. Not as the perfect daughter and the forgotten daughter. Just as two sisters who had both been shaped by the same family in different ways. Our relationship didn't become perfect overnight. My mother didn't suddenly transform. My father didn't become a different man. But something changed. I stopped chasing their approval. And because I stopped chasing it, their approval stopped controlling me. Months later, my mother called. She told me she wanted to visit. I asked why. She said she wanted to see my new home. I almost laughed. For years, she had compared everything I owned to Claire's. Now she wanted to see the life I had built after they had told me I wasn't welcome. When she arrived, I opened the door. She looked around my little apartment. There were photographs on the wall. Books on the shelves. Plants near the windows. A handmade ceramic bowl on the table. Nothing expensive. Nothing designed to impress. Just mine. She walked slowly through the rooms. Then she stopped beside a photograph. It showed me standing with several coworkers at a community fundraiser. My mother stared at it. She asked who those people were. I told her they were friends. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "You look happy." I smiled. "I am." There was a long silence. Then my mother sat down. She cried. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. She admitted that she had spent years comparing her daughters because she believed competition would make them successful. Instead, she had made one daughter feel superior and the other feel invisible. She said she couldn't undo what she had done. I told her she couldn't. But I also told her that she could choose what happened next. That was the beginning. Not a magical reconciliation. Not a perfect family reunion. Just a beginning. Over time, we rebuilt our relationship carefully. There were boundaries. There were difficult conversations. There were moments when old habits returned. But now I knew something I hadn't known before. Love without respect is not enough. Family without kindness is not enough. And forgiveness does not mean giving people unlimited access to hurt you again. A year after the wedding, Claire and Daniel invited me to dinner. At the end of the evening, Claire gave me a small box. Inside was the wedding invitation. The same design I had helped create. But this time, something had been added. My name. Not because I was being invited to a wedding. That wedding was already long over. My name was there because Claire had framed the invitation as a reminder. On the back, she had written that sometimes the people we push away are the very people who teach us what love should have looked like. I cried. She cried. And we hugged. It wasn't the hug of two sisters pretending nothing had happened. It was the hug of two people finally telling the truth. Years later, I still think about that night in my mother's kitchen. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had begged to attend. If I had argued. If I had cried in front of them. Maybe they would have felt powerful. Maybe they would have changed their minds temporarily. But I don't regret the words I chose. Good to know. Because those 3 words were not surrender. They were freedom. They meant I had finally received the information I needed. I knew where I stood. And once I knew, I could stop wasting my life trying to move the line. I could walk somewhere else. Somewhere I was wanted. Somewhere my kindness wasn't treated like weakness. Somewhere my presence wasn't an inconvenience. And perhaps that is the lesson I carry with me now. Sometimes rejection is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the first page of a better chapter. Sometimes the door that closes behind you is the same door that was keeping you trapped. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making people regret losing you. It's becoming so at peace with yourself that you no longer need them to regret it. If this story touched something inside your heart, please don't let it end with you silently watching. Like the video, share it with someone who needs the reminder that their worth isn't decided by who invites them into a room, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories about courage, kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. Your support truly helps these stories find the people who need them most. And before we end, I have one special request for you. Comment. I choose my worth. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who made you feel unwanted, or if you believe that sometimes walking away is the first step toward healing. Because you never know who might read your comment tonight, and realize they are not alone. The woman who walked out of that kitchen believed she had lost her family. What she didn't realize was that she had finally found herself. And sometimes, finding yourself is worth more than being welcomed into any room in the world.